Hello, welcome back. My name is Charlie, and I recently completed my first buddy read. My first buddy read that I personally hosted, and it was super fun. And I thought it'd be fun today to come on here and talk a little bit about that book, maybe a little bit about the buddy read itself, and just kind of wrap it all up. The book we read together was Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories. This is a collection of short stories ranging from as short as like under 20 pages to as long as around 100 pages. I think the longest story in this might have been like 90 pages, I think. So novella length short stories at times. And the genres in these stories kind of goes between fantasy, sci-fi, realistic, historical fiction, that sort of thing. So it's an interesting blend of stories here. Ken Liu, if you don't know, is the author of the Dandelion Dynasty series, which I have not read, but I've heard really great things about it. And he's also a translator. He translates books. I know he translated at least The Three-Body Problem, which is another series that people seem to love. This was my introduction to Ken Liu as an author, and I was really impressed by his writing. And it definitely made me intrigued. It made me want to check out more of his work. I mean, I already have been interested, but after reading through his prose in these 15 short stories, I'm especially intrigued. I'm very excited. I definitely bumped the Dandelion Dynasty way up on my list. And I think the first book in that series, the Dandelion Dynasty, is sort of written in a way that is like essentially a collection of short stories, but within that world, that fantasy setting. So a shared like setting across a multitude of essentially short stories that are interwoven to kind of set the groundwork for the rest of the series. And I already know that I like his short stories, so I feel like that'll be a really cool ramp up into his full-length novels that he completes that series with. Not only was this my first time reading Ken Liu's work, but it was also my first time reading a complete collection of short stories. I've read a decent number of short stories at this point, but never a full book's worth of short stories. And that was a really interesting experience. I broke this up, this buddy read, into just one short story per week. So the amount of reading required for this buddy read, or not required because it was entirely optional and voluntary, but the amount of reading that we did for the buddy read varied greatly week to week. You could read a 15-page story one week, and then, like I said, a 90-page story the week after. And the quality definitely also varied week to week. You know, it's a collection of stories, right? So they are curated. I'm sure he has written a lot more of these short stories. I know he has. He has at least one other collection of short stories out, published. So I know that he has probably written, who knows how many short stories. And so somebody curated this collection of stories and put them all together. So you imagine that they are all of a similar quality, but I definitely did think that the, not quality, but my enjoyment of the stories ebbed and flowed throughout. There are some that I would have rated closer to like a 2 out of 5 stars, and then there were a couple that were clear, no question asked, 5 out of 5 star reads. And because of that, I think that the way that I chose to structure this buddy read with just one story a week may not have been the best idea, at least for me. I don't know that I would do that again. If I chose to do a buddy read for a collection of short stories, I might think it through a little bit more, maybe 2 or 3 short stories a week, because it was a little bit of a bummer when you're reading, sometimes a really, really great story, but then the next week you just read one fairly weak story. And, maybe that story was really short, like a 15-page story that doesn't really do anything for you. But because I was keeping to the schedule, then I'm not picking this up for another week. And so I'm just kind of sitting with this weaker story, most fresh in my mind. And then when I get to the next one, if it's a lot better, that's great. But if it was kind of on par with that previous, now I've been reading this for 2 weeks straight and not getting a ton out of it. And that did happen in the later half of this collection, actually directly after the Paper Menagerie, which is, that's the Paper Menagerie and Other Stories is the title, right? But one of the short stories is called The Paper Menagerie. And that one, spoiler alert, was my absolute favorite of this collection. 5 out of 5 stars, hands down, my favorite, the most impactful for me. We'll get to that. But directly after that story, there were 3 in a row that I just didn't connect with as much, right? So I went from reading a 5 out of 5 to a 2 out of 5, and then a 2.5 out of 5, and then a 3 out of 5. And so that was, a big high, followed by 3 weeks of reading this collection where I wasn't feeling that 5 out of 5 feeling anymore. And it kind of, I think, it lowered my urge to pick the book back up, knowing that, it could be another week of reading just one story from this collection that I don't really connect with. If I was reading these stories, just back to back, like just reading it at my own pace, I think that would have not mattered as much because, you just keep reading. So, okay, this one didn't connect with me, but on to the next one. I still have, I'm going to read for another 45 minutes. I can knock out another 1 or 2 stories. And then that, maybe I'll find another one that I do connect with in that time. And so in this reading session, I would still have a really enjoyable read. I don't know if that point is landing. If I'm explaining this clearly, it makes sense in my head. Regardless of that, though, I did overall really enjoy this. I think I haven't yet rated this on Goodreads, like the collection as a whole, because I've been having a hard time figuring out exactly what I would give it, but I think I would just give the collection 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, there are 15 short stories in this collection, and 12 of those short stories I would personally rate at least 3 out of 5 stars. And I know some people think of a 3-star rating as pretty low, but I don't. A 3 out of 5 is good. I liked a 3 out of 5. I'm fine with reading that, especially if it's a short story. If it's a full-length novel and I give it a 3, maybe I feel a little more sour on it, but I still liked it. But for a short story, I have no problem reading a 3-star short story. So I did give one of these stories just a solid 2 out of 5, and 2 others I gave a 2.5 out of 5. Like, they approached a 3 but didn't quite get me there. But the rest were at least 3 stars. 6 of them I think 5 of them were 3 stars. One of them was a 3.5, and then from there the remaining 6 were at least 4 stars, with 2 full-on 5-star short stories. That was a lot of numbers and star ratings to throw at you, but what I'm trying to say is the majority of this story was really good. Because it is a collection of short stories, I'm not entirely sure how to discuss it here in this review. I could go one by one through each story and give you my thoughts, but honestly, if you are curious to hear my thoughts on each of these stories, I would just maybe point you in the direction of the Fable, which I'll link below. The discussion channels are all still up there, and you can still see mine and everybody else that joined this buddy read, their thoughts as well. And instead here, I'm just going to try to go through my overall experience reading this story and kind of give you the highlights. The book starts off with a story called The Bookmaking Habits of Select Species, I think is the title of it. And that was an odd start, I thought. I think my main comment on that short story was that it felt, it's not much of a story. Like, it didn't feel like much of a story, but it did feel like Ken Liu was just kind of flexing his creative muscles and showing you a little bit of what you're in for as you are about to delve into the rest of his mind. This was essentially just a catalog of different species that he's created and how they think of books and how they write books and how they read books. And so you get to see these alien races and examine what they consider a book and how that compares to what they might consider a memory and how they handle their storytelling and things like that. And it was really interesting, but I think unanimously in the discussion, everybody kind of was like, okay, this wasn't really a story, but it was definitely interesting. And it was fun to talk about each individual species and see which one we liked the most or which one we connected with the most, or kind of comparing the way that they do things, this alien race, to the way that we might do things here on Earth. And it was definitely an interesting one, and it sparked a lot of discussion right off the bat, which was really cool. And then we slid into the first one that felt more like a true story with like real depth and characters and a storyline, like a plot. And it was again really engaging, really compelling. And again, it made us in the buddy read think about sort of the things happening in the story and trying to extract it and compare it to things in our own lives. The main thing in this story is that people have physical items that kind of mirror their souls or represent their souls. And so we in the group were kind of trying to discuss what our soul might look like if we were in this world. And that was really cool. That's not something that I ever thought about before, and I don't know that I ever would have if I didn't read this story. So right away, Ken Liu made this super engaging. It was, immediately having my own creative juices flowing and having the discussion in the group flowing, and that was really cool. And it just kind of kept going from there. There were a lot of really great characters in these stories, which you're made to care about in such short page counts. It was remarkable in some of these stories in particular, how much you found yourself feeling for these characters. And I got worked up a couple times reading these stories, not just because I felt bad for them maybe, but some of the things that they had to go through in some of these stories are absolutely brutal, and his depictions of these things that happen to these characters, maybe check the trigger warnings before you read it. At least some of these, there are very real and traumatizing depictions of like kind of body horror, like torture and war camps and things like that. So it's not all like lovey-dovey. I'm feeling with this character, but sometimes I'm just feeling what that character's feeling because of the way that Ken Liu writes some of these scenes. It was brutal, and oftentimes these horrible things are happening to characters that you've already connected with in the pages prior, so it makes it kind of a physical and an emotional reaction. It was really, really well done in those scenes. None of that gratuitous violence felt like it didn't serve a purpose. I think Ken Liu also managed to create these really flawed characters, so sometimes even when you had what seems like this is the protagonist of this story, right? Like, that's clear. This is our main character. This is who we're rooting for. But sometimes even that character is flawed to the extent where I'm rooting for them, but I don't know that they're really making all the right decisions, or like I don't want anything bad to happen to them, but you did do some bad things. I also thought it was interesting how in some of the stories that were, on the sci-fi or fantasy side of things, the characters still felt incredibly human, and the issues that they were facing felt real. Like they were paralleled in our world. Sometimes the group was saying, well, I don't know that this story needed to be sci-fi. Like, I don't know that the sci-fi elements added to this story. Like, you could tell this same story just here on Earth without making it science fiction, right? And that's a fair critique, I think, and that definitely was in the back of my mind with some of these stories as you're reading it, and you're like, okay, you could just take out, I think there was one story where at one point the character's running really fast because they have pistons in their legs, and I mentioned in my comment that I could have read this story without them having pistons in their legs and believed that they were a fast runner, right? So sometimes the sci-fi and fantasy elements felt more like flavor than a necessity, but I was able to look past that because of the actual story that was being told in the story. It was also interesting to discuss this with people because there were times when we were talking about something that happened in the book, and we were talking about how, like, well, that doesn't feel very sci-fi because we have that sort of thing today. And then somebody would point out in the comments that that story was written in 2012. And it was like, oh, okay, reading this in 2012 would have been a very different experience than reading it now. And so that was really interesting for a multitude of reasons, right? Like, it was kind of like, oh, okay, wow, we've come really far since 2012 when this story was written. 2012 is a made up date. I don't know if that was when these things were written, but anyway, like thinking back and trying to compare when this was written to present day, it was interesting to think about how far we've come and how far we've gone in the direction that Ken Liu is depicting as like a bad direction, right? And it made you think multiple times throughout this collection. It made me think, at least, about my own relationship with technology, and there's a part about like essentially ads, right? And suggested ads and ads based on your own browsing history, right? Things like that. And somebody says something along the lines of like, how do you even know what you want? You're just going with what the computer tells you want, but that's what they want you to want. It's not really what you would want yourself if you weren't being presented with these curated items. It made me think about how many times I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling through and I see, somebody's house, somebody's talking about the way that they do something in their family or whatever, and you can see in the background they have all these toys out for their kids, and I'm just thinking to myself like, okay, I have all of those toys. I have those exact shelves, for the kids' books, and I have all of the same things in that person's room I also have, and it made me feel or it made me think of that, and it made me feel like I wasn't very unique. I wasn't really having my own tastes, my own interests, and I wasn't picking those things out. I was being handed the same things from the same algorithm that the person on the other side of my phone had already been given, right? And then they bought things, and I bought things, all for the same reason. But it made me think about that and feel a little gross about it, if that makes sense. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a lot of times where what this book made me feel was gross or bad, or like, it made me reflect on myself and my life and feel like uneasy about some of the things that we're all just kind of doing. A great example of that actually comes from the Paper Menagerie, the sort of title track of this book. If you don't read this entire collection, you should absolutely at least read the Paper Menagerie. It's so good. It's so powerful. I can't think of a time ever where I read something so short and had such a strong emotional reaction to it. It made me think of I don't even know. It makes you reflect on being a child, and it makes you reflect on being a parent, and it makes you really think about how those things connect in a way that I hadn't thought about before. Essentially, the main character in this story, that they have this, their parent is an immigrant, and their mother doesn't speak much English, and whatever, right? It goes from there. That's the beginning of the story, but it just keeps going from there, and it ends in this brutal moment where you've spent the last several pages kind of experiencing this kid's life, right? And how having this mother has impacted them, right? And then at the end of the story, it kind of flips, and you get to see a little bit from the mother's point of view, and it's just it's brutal. It's brutal. It's I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to spoil it, but it was really good. I was planning on reading a quote from this story, but now that I'm thinking about that quote, I think it'll spoil things. I'm not going to do it. There is a quote that I will read though from a different story, the Simulacrum, which is a story that I really enjoyed. It's so much more than this, but it's essentially the story of a character who has a grudge, right? They hold a grudge against their father. Forever, for their whole life. And there's a quote about that really stuck out in my mind. I don't have the actual quote in front of me, but the main character's mother is talking to our main character and kind of pleading with them to talk to their father and to kind of move on and forgive their father. And the mother, who's still very much in love with her husband, our main character's father, tells our main character that they think that they've been spending too long tracing the image of him in their mind, so much so that they've erased the person with the stencil. And I love that. I think that's so well done, well said. It made me think a lot about times in my life where maybe I've done the same thing, or where I feel people have done the same with me, where you hold somebody accountable for something that they did, but maybe you overdo it. Maybe you don't allow for that person to grow and change, and maybe they're seeking forgiveness, but you can't stop tracing over that image of them, the thing that they did one time, and you can't stop until the rest of that person is completely erased. Doesn't matter what other experiences you've had with that person or what they've done since then to atone. You're stuck on that one image. I thought that was really, really good. There was one unfortunate bit in this short story collection where 3 stories in a row were somewhat connected, like very loosely connected short stories. It almost felt like a connected trilogy, right? Not a direct sequel, these stories, right? But they were definitely in the same setting, essentially, even though that setting was kind of outer space. But anyway, I thought that was unfortunate because I didn't like it. I didn't connect with the first story in that trilogy. And then when we got to the next one, I was like, oh, okay, that's related, and it was a little bit better, but I don't want to be here anymore. And then I went to the next story. Again, I felt the same. I was just like, all right, I'm done with this group of people, this setting. And I just wanted to move on. And then I did move on. But it was just a bummer that it was 3 stories in a row that I didn't really vibe with. And if you like that story, then that'll be really fun for you. But for me, that was an unfortunate series to be included in this collection. And the last story that I'll talk about in this collection is the last story in the collection, The Man Who Ended History, a documentary. This is, like the title suggests, written in the style of a documentary, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think that worked necessarily for all of us in the group, but I thought that was neat. And it's the man who ended history, right? Not the man who ended the world, the man who ended history. So they kind of end the past. And this was a really cool idea. This was definitely a sci-fi story, but rooted in historical fiction or kind of alternate history. Or not really alternate history, alternate present based on the history. Anyway, basically they have time travel, right? That's the big thing. But they are able to use time travel to go back in time and just kind of view events. And so they go back to, for whatever reason, World War II, and they examine horrible things. It's talking about Unit 731, which I'm not going to talk about in detail what this group did. You can look that up on your own, just because it's brutal and horrible. And it's a piece of history that I didn't know about before reading this story. It was awful. It was awful to read about. It was really, really hard. I think, this is the story that comes to mind when I think of trigger warnings and where I would suggest that you look up trigger warnings before reading this story. I think it was a really important story to be written because, again, I had never heard of this, and I'm sure a lot of people reading this collection had never heard of this, and it made me do some research, and it was really powerful. It was, again, horrible to read, but really powerful, and I do think it was important. One member of the Buddy Read, Alvin, mentioned in his review of this particular story that he felt Ken Liu was able to give a voice to the victims of history in this story, and I thought that was really well said. I thought that's what made this story important, is that these nameless, faceless human beings were given kind of the spotlight for a minute here, and we got to see almost through their eyes what it may have been like to be in this situation. And again, it was brutal and it was horrible, but it was also really, really well done. This was my second 5-star story of this collection. It was almost my top one, but I think Paper Menagerie just beat it out. This one was a tough read. Like I said, I read it. I actually finished this one early. Like I read it before we got to that week, but I couldn't distill my thoughts on it for a while, kind of until now. Like I haven't given my thoughts in the Fable still, because I'm not sure how to explain it. How horrible it made me feel. Really, it it was visceral and traumatic, and yeah, that really, really powerful. I don't think I've had that level of a response to a piece of writing before. So really well done, really insane. And that's about it. Really, really, really strong collection of short stories here. Again, varied quality sort of throughout them. It ebbs and flows, but the highs were really high and the lows really weren't that low. I didn't dislike anything in this story, just some things I didn't connect with as much as I connected with others. So I would give Paper Menagerie and other stories a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely have already reread some of these short stories, and I could see myself rereading them again in the future. And yeah, I'd highly recommend this to just about anybody, with the caveat of checking the trigger warnings, because again, some things are really tough to read. And I'll mention again that if you are going to read any of these stories, if you're gonna pick just one, I would strongly suggest you pick up the Paper Menagerie. I do think everybody should read that story. And real quick, I just want to thank everybody who joined the buddy read. I had a ton of fun reading it with you, and while I think the cadence might not have been exactly right, I do think that the discussion that was fostered in the buddy read over on Fable was awesome, and it gave me so much more out of this this collection of stories than I would have gotten if I was reading it on my own in sort of like an isolation chamber. I think it was really cool to get these short bursts of discussion every week, where everybody was just kind of letting their brain spill out into their phone. I thought that was great. I really, really appreciate all of you who joined. I am very excited to host another buddy read. I'm not sure when I'll do it, but I definitely will, and I hope you'll all join again. And if you didn't join this one, again, I have the Fable linked down below. You can pick this up whenever you want and go and give us your thoughts there. You can read through the thoughts that we all had. It's all still up. I don't even know how to take it off, so it's all still up. And I will let you all know when I do my next buddy read. If you have any ideas or things that you would like to buddy read together, let me know. And that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.